I don't really have a funny bit this time. Roll the intro. So I vaguely remember when Quantum Break was being revealed at E3 in like 2013. It seemed incredibly ambitious of a concept for the time. An action-adventure game with a tie-in TV show with choices that affected the narrative in both the TV and game aspects. This was right around the time that Xbox was pretty much all in on their ill-fated TV initiative, and I imagine that Quantum Break fit into those plans quite nicely. Although, looking back at the actual reveal trailer for this game that premiered at E3, I noticed something very weird. I'm guessing anyone familiar with Quantum Break on a surface level knows it as the time thriller game with the guy from X-Men, the guy from Lord of the Rings, and the guy from Game of Thrones. That's at least what I knew it as before I jumped in and, learned more about it as I played it. But I must have completely memory holed that original trailer because it doesn't have any of those guys in it at all. It's a scene from the middle of the game that I recognize, but the main character, Jack Joyce, is played by Sean Dury, who would go on to play Nick, the cab driver in the final game. Courtney Hope's character, Beth, who is the other character in the scene, played by a completely different actor as well. The only actor from this trailer who made it into the final game as their character in this scene is the woman who plays Sophia Amaral. The actual gameplay and cast reveal wasn't even at E3, it was actually at Gamescom a couple years later in 2015. I just thought that was wild. It reminded me of just how drastically games can change over the course of their pre-release marketing. Like, a lot of developers will tell stories about how, oh yeah, that game was hot garbage until 6 months before it came out, and then the game comes out and it's fucking God of War 2018 and it wins all the Game of the Year awards. Look, this is a bit of a tangent. I don't know what I'm talking about. Video games are wild. Game development is wild. Every video game that comes out is kind of a miracle. Let's talk about this one. So Quantum Break would eventually release as an Xbox One exclusive in April of 2016. That's 1 month before Uncharted 4 on the PS4, if we're, just keeping track of some perspective here. Quantum Break is a third-person shooter / time thriller, and it does indeed have a tie-in show that is integrated throughout the course of the game, with one 20 to 30 minute episode occurring between each of the 5 acts. The game stars X-Men 2 and 3 star Shawn Ashmore as Jack Joyce, a man who is given time powers after a failed science experiment. It also stars Aidan Gillen as ambitious corporate villain Paul Serene and Dominic Monaghan as Jack's brother Will and the scientist behind the time experiment. It also stars Courtney Hope, who would go on to play Jesse Faden in Control, and the late great Lance Reddick as Martin Hatch. An undeniably stacked cast all around. So this is Remedy diving fully back into action after flirting with mystery and horror with Alan Wake. And while the ambitious tie-in TV project isn't necessarily the route I would have wanted them to take with a new action game, it is undeniably in character for Remedy. And after the overwhelmingly positive impression that Alan Wake's storytelling left on me, I was more than willing to give this whole hybrid model an honest try and see what they were able to come up with. This time I want to switch it up and talk about gameplay first again, because with Quantum Break, Remedy is back to sick as hell gameplay. We have signs of life of a Max Payne remake. Take a look at this gameplay and tell me it isn't both Max Payne coded and dope as shit. So this is the debut of Remedy's Northlight engine, and I love the way this engine looks, man. I love what they're able to do with it. Every game that they've made in Northlight thus far has been absolutely gorgeous, and Quantum Break is no exception. The blend of stylized lighting with super realistic environments and characters is such a cool look, and it's such a perfect match for Remedy's mixing of realistic gameplay and environments with surreal mystery elements. This basically establishes Remedy's visual identity going forward, and it is a damn good one. It looks great, it fits with their style, and it's just gorgeous, man. The environmental design is top-notch once again. There's just so much gorgeous scenery to look at, even, 9 years removed from this game's release. The version of Quantum Break I played for this review is the Xbox One X Enhanced update from 2017, played on an Xbox Series X. It still runs at 30 frames per second, and it never got a next-gen update for Series X, so no frame boost, no 4K, no nothing like that, but the game still looks really good. For a game with super realistic graphics, it has aged remarkably well. I think this is because of its strong art and lighting direction, and also the cool and distinct look of the game's time powers. And speaking of these time powers, not only do they look cool, like just stylistically, but they are also flashy and fun as hell to use in gameplay. It all starts very basic. Like once you're introduced to the shooting, it introduces you to the first time power, which is Time Stop, which basically lets you freeze an area in front of you and kind of stack bullets so they all hit the same enemy at once. Very cool stuff. But once you have a full suite of these time powers, you're slowing down time, sprinting like the Flash, doing melee takedowns before the enemies even know what's going on, triggering explosions that lock enemies into a temporal glitch. It all flows together so brilliantly and makes you feel incredibly powerful by the end. It feels like Remedy has found their sense of fun again with this game, and that makes me so happy because it means now that they get to pair that sense of fun with their incredible storytelling chops that they honed in with Alan Wake. And the story in Quantum Break is really interesting. Like I said, it's basically a time thriller. The game starts with the protagonist, Jack Joyce, being invited by his hotshot science investor friend, Paul Serene, to take part in an exciting new time travel experiment designed by Jack's brother, Will. The experiment goes wrong and basically breaks time. And it also gives Jack his time powers. It also turns Paul into the full-on villain that he is through ways that are revealed later in the story. I think Jack is a surprisingly good protagonist. I think Shawn Ashmore plays him with a really good mix of intensity and humor. And while he has some backstory that is divulged in the, flavor text found throughout the game, the only part of his backstory that I found really compelling was his relationship with Will, which I think is one of the better character dynamics in this game. A lot of his dialogue is narration as he retells the events of the game, so most of the characterization comes from how he feels about the situation at hand and all the other characters. As far as the other characters go, I think the cast of characters in this game is generally really great. Particularly Beth Wilder, played by Courtney Hope. Sometimes she feels like she should straight up just be the protagonist of this game. She has a much more fleshed out and emotionally complex backstory than Jack does, so she becomes a very, very compelling character as a result. Martin Hatch, played with gravitas by the incredible Lance Reddick, is one of the most interesting characters Remedy has had in any other game so far. At first glance, he seems like a cold corporate shark, right? But you eventually realize that there's a lot more going on behind his eyes, and it's just so fascinating. Speaking of more going on, Quantum Break, as I mentioned before briefly, is a choice game. After each main act, you play a short section where you control Paul Serene. You get a quick setup scenario, and then you have to make a choice that will affect the rest of the game. From the overall tone of the story to the fate of specific characters, these choices matter a lot more narratively than I initially thought they would. You don't get mechanical changes or a ton of different endings or anything, but the journey you take to get there can play out in dramatically different ways. Some choices are explicit in what their effects will be, others save some surprises for much later that you probably will never have seen coming by the time they happen. So the other significant aspect of this game's storytelling that I want to dive into is the TV tie-in show. Basically, after you play one of these choice segments called Junctions, you get an episode of the show. The show follows a parallel narrative with its own protagonist, Liam Burke, who you see briefly working for the villainous Monarch Corporation at the beginning of the game. As far as pacing, it's integrated pretty well into the rest of the game. I actually found a pretty decent rhythm of kind of coming home from work, after, taking care of all my dinner and everything like that, I would play the game for a couple hours, play one act, make the choice, and then watch the TV show for 20 or 30 minutes, and then it would be pretty late, and I would, kind of be getting ready for bed at that point. It was a pretty solid rhythm, and I kind of get what they were going for if that's the kind of flow that they were trying to establish with something like this. Something you can play, and then instead of deciding to watch something else, you'd be like, oh, to watch my TV show tonight, I'm just gonna watch the episode of the show that I just unlocked in the game. It's kind of a smart idea if you think about it that way. However, the plot and cast of the TV show are kind of siloed off into their own lane, with some occasional ripple effects that affect the main game, along with a bunch of stuff to read. There is a lot of stuff to read in this game. The writing is all very good. It is Remedy's strong suit at this point, but there is simply too much of it. The thing is, as a player, I don't really care how good it is. I don't want to read 10 email chains that are all 12 entries long. That's just what it comes down to. And I think that, the supplementary reading materials could use some brevity in later entries. I really hope that they kind of exercise that a little bit. Just some restraint. The writing is great, but a little restraint. Getting back to the TV show though, I found myself pleasantly surprised by how engaging it was. The production felt a little cheap and maybe CW-esque at times. The time fracture effects, as an example, look way cheaper in the show than in the game. And the action is also choreographed and cut like a lot of TV action is. It's quick and fairly incomprehensible to follow. The Liam Burke storyline is overall pretty good. I was surprised by how much I was actually affected by certain parts of it. But it's just not as interesting as Jack's story. The time travel experiment storyline with Jack, Paul, and Beth is pretty incredible, and it goes places I didn't expect. The Burke storyline has some unexpectedly good characters, like if you told me after the first episode that Charlie the hacker was going to be my favorite character from the show portion, I would have thought you were insane, but he actually had a really great character arc. There's definitely some sloppy characterization in the show though. For example, Liam's wife expresses little to no agency in any of the scenes that she's in. It is revealed to her, at some point throughout the story, that her husband is a corporate assassin with a huge body count and not the sexy kind. He strangles a man to death in front of her and all of her coworkers, and she is rightfully horrified to see this, but then immediately decides to go along with him without a second thought. Like, there is a lot of explaining that he does to her, but there's just very little as far as how that affects her. For the love of God, say something. Say something. This is the one pattern in Remedy storytelling that I'm not a fan of so far that I'm noticing, is that I'm not a fan of the roles that female characters typically play in their games. Like in Liam's case, like maybe the one humanizing aspect of his life, which is his relationship with his wife, could have been the thing to convince him to be merciful in a moment where being merciful would have a significant effect on the plot and it would feel really satisfying, but instead, no, it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And it was a missed opportunity, and it could have been really awesome. As I said before, though, the main storyline with the game is way better. The cast of characters in the main game and their relationships with each other are way better. And I think Beth Wilder in particular is the best character that Remedy has written in any of their games so far, so it's definitely not all bad. We are seeing some progress, you know? Anyways, nitpicking aside, this is an incredibly ambitious concept, and Remedy executed on it better than I would have assumed that anybody could have. It makes me wonder why I skipped it back when it came out. I think the TV tie-in probably scared me away because at that point I was still scarred, along with every other Xbox One owner, by their early push to cram as much TV integration into that thing as possible. Also, around 2016 is probably when I was getting back into PlayStation, exploring the big exclusives of the time like Uncharted 4 and Bloodborne, and playing more multiplayer stuff on Xbox. Having played it now, though, the action is extremely my shit, and I'm surprised at how much I enjoyed the story as well. Like, you know, I could show you crazy action gameplay, you know, until the cows come home. There's a lot of really awesome looking and awesome feeling action in this game. But I experienced a moment of like profound emotional melancholy when playing this game, and it was all due to like this little side mechanic. Basically, one of the time mechanics in this game is mostly a way to get past obstacles. It is a way to reverse time in an area so that objects move back to a position that they were previously. And so basically, Jack rewinds time to lift something, move something, restore power to a generator that's not working anymore, so on, stuff like that. But late in the game, you happen across a rewind prompt that does not have any gameplay applications. It doesn't get you past any obstacle or give you any plot-relevant information. It's just a worn piece of graffiti, and you're reversing time and getting rid of all the wear and tear so you can see the full, clean artwork as it was originally done. And this artwork is done by a character who, by this point in the story, is no longer around anymore. And it just kind of had me sitting there staring at this artwork, and I got a little sad. Like, you know, I was reflecting on the journey that I had been through with these characters over the past, like, you know, couple weeks it had been at that point, and the journey that they had been through with each other and how their relationships had changed and how that one character wasn't around anymore, and I kind of missed that character, and that this graffiti is kind of all that's left of them, and even that's being worn away by time. And it just made me real sad. Like, I was just like, wow, that's a really significant thing for a game to make you feel like that. And I don't know about you folks out there, but moments like that are one of the reasons why I come to video games in the first place. Like, I am a challenge junkie just like anybody else. I will go and, you know, try and spend 8 hours on the same boss because I happen upon a moment where I'm like, I can do this, and then I'm like, oh shit, now I have to do this, and I'm spending 8 hours fighting, you know, Sigrun from God of War on Gimme God of War New Game Plus difficulty, and I just lose an entire day doing that. That has happened before. But gameplay and narrative and mechanics all coming together to stir some shit in you, make you feel some stuff. I love that. I love that shit, man. And I kind of feel that way about this game as a whole. It leaves a very strong impression. You know, I come away with it not necessarily regretting that I didn't play it back in the day, but thankful that I have now. Like with Alan Wake, I went in with very little expectations and came away pleasantly surprised. The whole multimedia aspect of it, the ripple effects that your choices have, I came away very impressed. In retrospect, Quantum Break kind of feels like the forgotten child of the Remedyverse a little bit. It feels like they're all in on Alan Wake and Control, but they don't seem to be flaunting Quantum Break as much in their connected universe. Maybe that's because it's so heavily tied to Xbox, being a platform exclusive and all. Maybe there are rights issues like there have been with Max Payne for a while. I mean, there's a reason the upcoming Max Payne remakes are so upfront as being co-produced by Rockstar. I imagine it took a lot of time and effort to make that deal happen. But regardless, there are some connections between Quantum Break and the larger Remedyverse as a whole, and they mostly tie to Alan Wake. He briefly appears on a screen in-game in what looks to be a trailer for American Nightmare. You can tell because he's wearing the American Nightmare fit. Dope fit. I really like that fit. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the last video or not, but that's one of my favorite Alan Wake fits. And then there is a very detailed blackboard in one of the classrooms at Will's school that basically seems to explain the entirety of the Alan Wake plot. Like, everything seems to basically be there. I'm sure if you spend enough time staring at this, you would understand what's going on in Alan Wake. And there's also Martin Hatch, who connects somehow. I'm not gonna go into any more detail, both because of spoilers and also because I don't think I fully understand it yet. But there is definitely something going on more with that character. What an awesome character though, man. Fully elevated by Lance Reddick. Just such an incredible performance. Does a lot with very little. We're back now to the point that I really wanted to get to when I started this whole Remedyverse endeavor, which is we're about to get into the really weird shit. So I hope you'll join me next time as we plunge into the depths of the mysterious FBC and revisit one of my favorite games of the last few years, Control. With all that being said, until next time, I love you all very much. Take care of yourselves. Peace out, my friends.